Hi, today we want to talk about getting rid of primitive obsession by introducing value objects. We'll explain what the value objects are, what are the characteristics, and how you can use them, how you can identify them in your project. Hi, Tomek.
Hi, Łukasz. Basically, let's start with in general, what's the value object, right? The value object is like the object that represents the value. That's it, right? It's kind of pattern. It is pattern that we use, as I said, to represent some kind of value in our system. And what's interesting here and quite important is that it's when we say usually about value objects, people are thinking about domain-driven design, right? But that's totally not connected, right? I mean, you don't have to do the full, let's say, DDD approach to have value objects. Value objects are just a pattern that we actually quite often see that the systems lack of them, right? Because they are to be used you can use it in your system from now even. you can apply
And
it
also,
in your system, right?
even more regarding the DDD, value objects existed before DDD was introduced, but what Evans did, he did make it a little bit more popular. Although I think the good programmers of that times, they already knew and used it. Maybe it was named like this, maybe it had a slightly different name. But the thing is, Tomek mentioned, you can use value object pattern as piece of DDD, as a piece of domain. Then it will be driven by slightly other rules when you think about integrating or exposing this, but we'll not cover that today. And the other one is that you can have this pattern and just make it useful for your system because, well, it's a really good pattern. Okay.
Yeah. I think I will just add here that what you mentioned, that they are quite popular. I think why we connect them usually with the DDD is like because they are quite popular, right, in the DDD community. But outside of it, you can use them, and I think they are also popular because they are helping you with this famous like making implicit explicit, right? Because they are around usually those primitive values that you have in systems, so strings, numbers, and so on, and they trying to encapsulate logic that should be around those values that you use in your system. Usually, when you, for example, have some places where you do those comparisons of strings or some numbers, and that's first sign where you probably could try to use the value object pattern.
Yeah, and I think we'll also we'll get into pros and cons really soon when we show different examples. But Tomek, how would you characterize the value objects? What's very specific for this pattern when we think about the value object?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things, but the most, important ones are that they have no identifier, right? So if we have aggregates or entities, we always have this ID which we use to find the specific object in your database or different place, right? But you characterize the aggregate with the ID. When you fetch it, you have the aggregate with specific ID.
Just for those of you who are not very familiar with DDD, I will not explain the aggregate, but if you are not using aggregates, then the entity that has the ID and you are fetching it from the database is just your active record model, right? If you have a user, you usually find it by ID or maybe something else, but the user has the ID. And then we track how the user changes over time. We never lose the connection with the user unless it's deleted. And we can always track them back. Okay, so that's the first characteristic. Value objects have no identifier. What are the others?
Because they identify the value, right? They don't identify some kind of specific instance of the model. They identify the attribute, more like attributes. So then the model can have like value objects inside because they are like attributes of this model, right?
Yeah. So when we use those attributes to also compare the value objects, right? So if we have two objects that have exactly the same values, they are equal. We could put the equal sign between them, but they don't have to have the same reference, right?
Exactly. The instances are they are like the values are equal, right? But the instances are two different instances of the value object.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And there's one more characteristic that is important, which is that the value objects are immutable by design, right?
Immutable. Yeah. Hard word for me usually. So thanks.
No worries. Okay, what does it mean? It means that once we create an instance of such an object, you will see that just soon in the code example, then we cannot modify it. So we should strive to make the class design in a way that the value object, that it's not possible to modify the value object. You need the different values? All right, just create a new object, right? It has some performance implications as well, because the objects can be reused, right? If we create many value objects that have no different identifier and they are equal, we also implement the hash methods to ensure that then they can be reused by the language driver or system. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that let's say it's still not a big deal. I think.
Yeah.
Those objects are still quite small. Let's say, right?
They should be.
Yeah, they just have like some kind of rules that make sure that you don't create like the object which is like attribute which is invalid in your domain. Right?
Yeah. And common examples are the country value object, for example, which we also have a blog post about. And this one is about mutant-driven development of country object. I encourage you to check it out, as it explains some of the decisions that you may also consider when designing value object. Another one is money, and I know there is a popular gem representing money. And also full name, for example, right? Because the full name may be or just a name of a person may be composed of a different parts, right? It may be first name plus last name, but it also may be a middle name. It also may be a title, like I don't know, King Tomasz, for example. So to fully represent that and to also be able to represent that sometimes in the UI, it's useful to introduce value objects as well.
Yeah, and I think like what we said is like they are usually when you want to replace some kind of primitive type like string, for example. And I think there's a very good post from Szymon on our blog as well, when he actually where he describes creating the value object in Rails event store repository, right? So the Rails event store it's like quite technical thing, right? I mean, it's not like domain-driven design project.
I mean, it's not a typical business web application, right?
Yeah.
It's a library, and still the pattern is useful here. Yeah, you're correct.
Because there was some kind of like string with the, I think, database adapters, right? Which was checking. We were checking it in a few places in the code, and he replaced that with the value object. So the link somewhere here.
And I think the problem he dealt with, but I don't remember that exactly, but it will be also visible in our example, is the shotgun surgery, right? So, and the shotgun surgery anti-pattern, it's characterized whenever you need to create some small change, for example, in validation. Then if you need to do it in, let's say, 10 files, because maybe the API changed or API of the class, or the validation method, and this will be visible in the first example, then if you need to modify those places altogether, maybe in one commit, maybe in commits that follow each other, then this is a sign, this heuristic or rule of thumb, depending on how you want to call it, that you may need to introduce some encapsulation. In some cases, this will be the value object that would help with such a changes. Definitely in the future. So if something changes frequently and it changes together in different places, consider value object.
Yeah, I think we talked a lot now, right?
Let's jump to the code. Yeah.
Yeah, let's jump into the code. I think we explained quite a lot here. So yeah, so Łukasz, could you guide us a bit through this code here? It's like Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have like.
So you may have different reasons to get the user email, right? And it's not uncommon, unfortunately, to see that it's designed in the way that we presented here. Some have registration controller in which you register the user and you need to validate the email, right? Hopefully you do that. I decided to do it through regex here. And also you have invitation controller in which you would like to invite a user. Of course, this is a pseudocode. I didn't run it, but you get the idea. And you also in the invitation controller, you have exactly the same code to validate the email. And now the problem is that, and one of the reasons why you may see that you need the value object would be that you need to change the regex. Hopefully you remember that you need to do it in 2 places. That would be the first sign. The other sign is that maybe you're tired of regex, you don't understand it, and you would like to change the implementation. So if you could scroll down, Tomek, and you notice in some newsletter that there's a new hot gem available that checks the email. It's perfect, it's tested, it's quick, fast, and whatnot. And you remove the regex, you replace this line with the validated email. But now you need to once again do that in 2 places, right? Seems like there's some kind of abstraction is missing. Okay, but if it turns out that the new gem is like new hot gem is like a hot potato and the API changes very frequently, if you could scroll down, Tomek, then with each API change, we need to once again change the implementation in our controllers, and we need to do it in more than one place. That's why I hope you know why. That's why I hope you understand why this is called shotgun surgery, right? One thing changes and it causes multiple changes over the repository. And how we could deal with that is by introducing an email value object in this case. And what we do here is that we have the constructor to initialize, but this constructor shouldn't be used. Maybe we can hide it from the usage and just leave it for the creation of the value objects from the database, for example, because the rules may change and the value object may not be valid anymore, but we wouldn't like to not be able to load it, right? This is a separate problem that we would need to deal with that. I will not get into this right now. But what we usually do, what we like to do is to introduce factory methods, right? So we would call this email.create. And then in this create method, we would have some validation. And this would keep our API very similar to what we had with this superhot gem email validator or whatever. So we would introduce a valid method and also some way to get a value, right? And also we have the calculation of hash and equal method, because this is also important when you introduce the value objects. And maybe I'll just quickly explain. Okay, so hash and method is important to be able to detect the hash collision in the hash object, but more important is the equal method, which we also alias to the equal sign. And what is very important, and often I saw that people forget it in the blog post about the value objects, is that they only compare the properties, right? But what we also should compare is the class. So here in the first part of the if statement, I check whether, the Boolean statement actually, I check whether the other object that I'm comparing, right? So this, I want to compare it value by value, but I also need to make sure that this is the same class, because I wouldn't like to compare apple to oranges just because they have some weight, right? I couldn't price it the same. I couldn't put the same price on them, right? Because maybe the oranges are more expensive than apples, but if they have the same weight, well, that would be weird. So first of all, we need to compare the class. And as I mentioned, it's often missing in the blog post. And then we need to compare the properties. If there was more properties, there would be another and statement, and so on and so forth.
If we have, for example, silly example, but if we have like not valid email value object, without that, it would break, right? Without comparing the class.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So now, if we would use this email, this would save us from the shotgun surgery, right? Because it doesn't matter why we say it's valid; it happens in the object itself, right? And this is how I mentioned we would use it. So we would call the factory method of email with this params email that we have. And then we could validate if it's valid. And if it's not, we will keep the behavior. If it is, it would be just transferred, saved into the database, right? And there are two more aspects. One is that quick question, do I have to remember about hashes and equal implementation? And as I wrote in the comment here, no, you don't, because Ruby from version 3.2 defines or introduce the data class, and you can use the data to define your value object, and the hash and equal will be handled for you. We'll show you that in the next example where we have some tests prepared. But I know that Tomek doesn't like this implementation.
Yeah, I mean, especially this method, valid method here. I mean, for the example purposes to be like consistent with the previous, let's say, APIs that we were using from this hot gem and so on. It's okay, right? Because we wanted to like keep this interface.
Functional style, let's say, right? It's more like functional style.
But then for me, usually when you have like value object, you have, or you already know that the email is valid, right? I mean, because in the on the high level, I would like to have value objects that are, in definition, they are valid, because usually what we do in the value objects is like for the external world, let's say, we expose the interface, which is email, which is like specific type, email type, value object, like here. But internally, we have a very simple primitive value, usually, which is email, which is string in our case. And we want to make sure that the email value object protects this primitive value from malforming it, right? So we protect the primitive value to be like valid one. So I would prefer something like having the scratch here where we change that. So when we create the email value object, we raise the error when there are some validation issues. So then we also remove the valid method, and right, we try to create a value object, but if it's not valid, we just throw an error. Because on the very low level, when we have those primitives here, primitive value here, and we store it in database, I would like to have like the database. I would like always want to have like valid emails there. There. I would not like to have like in the database value object which was created and then was stored in database, but actually it was invalid, right? In invalid state, because the value object, which is also very important, help us to protect from bugs that are really hard to debug, right? So they are like about keeping incorrect state in your models, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I would prefer like this kind of implementation, for example, here.
The main difference is that we will have to change the API in the controller, and it would have to rescue this invalid email error or whatever you call it. But still, I know that there are some people that don't like exceptions. Then you can use this more like result-oriented factory method. For those people who are okay with exceptions, you can use this raise invalid email error. This will suit you just as well. And there's
but
one
still,
more.
Well, just one. Still, we like have this constructor here, right? With the without the validation, as Lukasz mentioned before, because still. From the past, for example, we can have some kind of emails that are incorrect in our database, but we would like to create the value objects from there. But then we don't use the constructor to create the value object itself on our end, right? We always want to use this method here.
Yeah, and you may say, but why would it happen? When would it happen? Let's say that business makes decisions that in the B2B company, we only want to have business clients, right? So maybe we don't allow the Gmail, Hotmail, and other like private emails to be registered, right? We could achieve it by just introducing such a rule, business rule, to the value object, and then because of that, we would only have to change it in one place. So there is no more this shotgun surgery issue that we would deal with normally.
Yeah. So I think after explaining this, I think we can jump into the test, right? You mentioned
yes.
Before.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So this test just shows that, first of all, that two value objects with the same email, even though they wouldn't have the same reference, right? But the way it's designed, it's not necessary for the comparison. And as you can see, if we create two emails that are the same, we can compare them, right? And this test passes because email is equal to the other email. I encourage you to run with those tests and experiment. We will put the gist into description. And also, as you can see, we defined the other email class. I just named it other email, but because email was already taken. And as you can see, I use the data define here, right? So it defines that there is a value attribute, the valid method still left over without the exception, but the valid method checks if the email contains the @ sign. I did see that implementation of email validation, by the way, a couple of times. And as you can see as well, those two value objects actually are also equal. This test is also green when we create the blah@example.com. And this implementation, well, as you can see, it's simpler because, well, you don't care about the hash and the equal method. And also there's one more test. Of course, two more tests. One is that it covers the checking instance of a class, right? That I talked about. And as you can see, those two emails are not equal. And this test is also green because, well, they don't have the same class. And there is also one more test that checks that the email is immutable, meaning that I cannot change the value of this class, right? I mean, there is probably a way in a Ruby to hack it with some meta programming, but please don't do that. I mean, immutability is something that you want because it's a large benefit of introducing value objects to your application. All right, and that's everything we wanted to show you regarding the value objects. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you can make use of it. Remember, whenever you spot the need to change multiple files because of one validation change or maybe some kind of API change, consider introducing the value object. It is really helpful. It's easy to test, as you can see, because it's plain old Ruby object. It doesn't have any external dependencies. It's very handy, so I encourage you to use it. Thank you for watching. See you next time.
Thank you. See ya. Bye.